So, well, I'm going to present Maria. Is a Lacanian psychoanalyst, member of the Lacanian Compa, associated group of NLS. Her publications have appeared in the International Lacanian Review, the Lacanian Compass, Psychoanalytical Notebooks, Cuarto, Ecos, and Lacanian Addiction, an anthology. She holds a doctorate. Today we have two doctors, two PhDs, a degree in clinical psychology and a master's degree in mental health. She completed her undergrad work in anthropology and sociology. She has been working with children and adults in the autistic spectrum for over 20 years in community settings and private practice in Miami, Florida. Leon Brenner is a philosopher and psychoanalytic theorist from Berlin. He's currently a lecturer at the International Psychoanalytic University and a research collaborator of Ghent University. He participates in the activities of Initiative Berlin, associated linked to the NLS. His work focuses on psychoanalytic theory of subjectivity and the understanding of the relationship between culture and psychopathology. His book, The Autistic Subject on the Threshold of Language, was published with the Palgrave Lacan series in 2020. I will copy his website on the chat so you can visit his website with more information. So before starting, yeah, Maria, if you can mute yourself, please. Yeah, that was important. If everybody can mute yourself, that was this part that I was going to say. So first, the logic of the presentation is that Leon will start his presentation, and then Maria will continue with cases, and then we will open up the question for discussion. So you can make the question on the chat or raise your hands with a little hand that Zoom allows us. So please, during all the presentation, have your microphone turned off unless you are unmuted by me to make your questions. If you raise your hand or you ask a question on the chat, okay? So thank you so much. Welcome, Leon, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Ines. I'm really happy to come to this event. It's amazing. I can participate in an event in Toronto so easily. Today, I'll have to come and visit at another time. Yes. Ines, you kindly mentioned the website and you posted it. Yes, it's the best place to get in touch with me and talk about some stuff. So you can contact me through the website if you wish after this this short lecture. I'll just ask, this is something of a personal request. I see some familiar faces today. I've chatted with some already. But if you can show your face, it's always nicer to speak to a face and rather to speak to a name, to a faceless name. So if it's possible, that's a personal request from me. So yeah, let's begin. I'm going to talk about theory today, so this is what I've been asked to do. And as you know, theory is not a sufficient condition for the formation of an analyst, but it's a necessary one, alongside having one's analysis and the supervision that orients one's work. And in this sense, when we speak about knowledge that is considered to be psychoanalytic, we can say that it has several dimensions. First is the knowledge of the unconscious. Then there is the knowledge of the transference and the direction of the treatment. And finally, there is theoretical knowledge that supports the work with the unconscious in the transference. And today I was asked to discuss this kind of psychoanalytic knowledge. And in light of the argument presented by Alexandre Stevens for the next NLS conference, I will present some insights on the notions of fixation and repetition in the context of my work on the subject of autism. And what better point to depart or to begin this talk begin speaking about fixation and repetition rather than speaking of the Freudian drive. So if you can please indulge me, I will take you from what we can refer to as a mistake in translation to a translation which is also a new take on the differential practice of the RIM in the treatment of autism. And this will also be the point where Maria will take over and discuss the practicalities. So, beginning with a error of translation. The drive is a much more psychoanalytic concept than the instinct. However, in the English translation by James Strachey, the German word for drive, Trieb in Freud, is translated to instinct. Now in German, these two words are very distinct. There is the Trieb and the instinct. But when we read the original translation, we see that they're both translated to the same word. Now, Lacan in seminar 11, and I will focus on the seminar in the beginning of my talk today, explicitly says, Trieb and instinct have nothing in common. So I'll start by explaining that a little bit. So we'll take small steps until we reach some destination at least. So what is an instinct? An instinct can be viewed as a hardwired biological program that compels the survival of the organism. It acts to fulfill the organism's instinctual needs by raising tension levels and lowering them when they are satisfied. This is what we can call the natural rhythm of the body. And I'll show you later a little schema. It looks a little bit like a sinus wave. Now, the drive is something completely different. The drive is a unique product of the encounter between the biological organism and language. It embodies the mutual effects that language and the body have on each other. And rather than being equated to the instinct, it originates from a rupture in the instinctual organization of the natural world of the organism. So we're talking here about a break that thrusts, let's say, something, let's call it the organism, from the real into the domain of symbolic reality, and introduces the order of the signifier. And now we're becoming a bit more Lacanian when we say that the drive emerges as an excess that is produced by the cut that the signifier introduces into the real. Maybe an aphorism, but can be studied a bit further. I'm just going to leave it there today. If we go back to Freud, we might say that this cut that Lacan goes to great extent to describe in linguistic terms, this cut can be said to circumvent the orifices of the body, or what we call in psychoanalysis the erogenous organs. So for Freud, we have the oral, the anal, the phallic, and for Lacan, we have also the scopic, having to do with the eyes and the gaze, and the invocatory, having to do with listening and the voice. So these are the names of the drives in psychoanalysis, where Lacan, at a certain point after seminar 10, takes the phallic off the list. Now, in seminar 11, Lacan presents another step in his assessment of the drive in what he calls the deconstruction of the drive. And he does so by using 4 Freudian components of the drive. So the first one is the Drang, the thrust. Second one is the Ziel, the aim. The third is the Objekt, or the object. And the last is the Quelle, or source. So I'll quickly elaborate these components and contrast them with what we might call the instinct. So the thrust of the drive is characterized by Freud as a constant force. And unlike the, let's say, instinctual need, like hunger, it doesn't engage the organism as a whole, but is divided into the erogenous zones of the body. Now, instead of a sinus wave, when we think about the thrust of the drive, we can imagine a straight line, what in mathematics is called a constant function. The aim of the drive is what provides the trajectory for its satisfaction. But what is interesting is that Lacan insists that there's a strict dissociation between the aim of the drive and the object of the drive. What he says is that the drive aims for the satisfaction that is totally indifferent to the identity of its object. So when we think about the instinct and we think about hunger, for instance, we say, well, the object of hunger is the consumption of food. But when we speak about the oral drive, its satisfaction doesn't necessarily its satisfaction not necessarily achieved by putting food in the mouth. For instance, one can gain oral satisfaction by just ordering from the menu. So we see that the drive aim goes around the object and not in the direction of the object. It gains satisfaction by demarcating the contours of the object. And this is why we argue that the drive reaches its goal without attaining its object. Now, the last element that I'll discuss today is the source of the drive. And this is what Lacan associates with a rim-like structure of the erogenous zones of the body. So this is the word rim, which will be central in this talk. And here we see its first appearance. So the erogenous zones are not strictly associated with their biological function, but they're defined by their role in the mediation between the body and language. Now, armed with these four components of the drive, in seminar 11, Lacan develops what we call the schema of the drive circuit. And I'll share this schema with you right now, just to show you how it looks like. So this is my sort of drawing of the schema, copying it from the seminar 11. And you see all the elements of the drive in the schema. So in the center of the schema, you identify the drive object. Right? On the right, there is the source of the drive that is replaced by the figure of the rim. The thrust of the drive is represented by the arrow that moves in a circular trajectory. It originates from within the rim, aims around the object, finally returning to its source, which is represented in the schema by the goal. So the schema accentuates the dissociation between the drive's aim and its object. And this time it demonstrates that the drive's goal is not the attainment of the object, but the return to the source. So I'll stop sharing right now. What we see in Freud, in different words, is that at some point in a child's early life, the drive stops its development and is fixated in a certain way. And this fixation sets in place this circular and continuous movement of the drive circuit, putting in place this most essential mode of libidinal repetition. This is a repetition of a movement where the drive originates from the erogenous zone and continues to circumvent the object by returning to the erogenous zone from where it sets on its path yet again. So I'll share another little drawing I made for you today, which demonstrates why, while one is hungry, one eats a sandwich and then subdues his instinctual needs. So we look at this sinus wave, right? So someone is hungry, let's say, so they eat and they're not as hungry. Okay, and now they're hungry again and they eat or they're not hungry. This is how, let's say, the rhythm of the body, the rhythm of the organism, the rhythm of the instinct works. You are hungry, you get full. But when we talk about the drive, we're talking about a different situation. It's a situation when one is hungry, okay, they eat food and they're not hungry anymore, but then they keep on eating another cake and another cake and maybe having an ice cream. And you see this is the little trajectory going out of the rhythm of the body. So we see that the satisfaction that I gain from eating all these cakes has nothing to do with the instinctual rhythm, but has to do with the satisfaction of the drive. And this is why Lacan says, and I brought this little quote here, that the object petit a, the object of the drive, is introduced from the fact that no food will ever satisfy the oral drive except by circumventing the eternally lacking object. So, not so much being an object that can be found and consumed, the drive object functions as the hinge that conditions the relationship between the rim in its manifestation as a source and a goal. So it's situated in the schema between two surfaces of the rim, that of the body and that of language. It's like a rock that is tucked under two sheets around which a rope is tied to hold them together. It is demarcated by the rim and ensures that the two remain linked. So this is just some memories from my Boy Scout years of how you tie together two fabrics, right? You put a little rock inside and you tie them around with a rope, right? So we see this in Lacan's schema as well. Now we take a step into the domain of autism. And I'll just share briefly that one of my hypotheses regarding autism is that in autism, something of the inscription of the of the rim in the psyche is foreclosed. And in my book, I call this autistic foreclosure. And I associate it with the alterations that we see in the functioning of the drive among autistic subjects. I'll share another little drawing I've prepared for today. So what we can briefly state, and this drawing will illustrate in a way of illustration, is that in autism, the drive circuit is altered in such a way that neither affects the thrust of the drive. The thrust remains a constant force. It doesn't affect the object per se. The object appears in the foreground of an intolerable real. But what it affects is the rim. The rim is lacking, the source and the goal of the erogenous zone. Now, without a rim, the drive circuit loses its aim and is thrust into an aimless movement, as you can see here, unable to symbolically inscribe the drive object. So, in other words, we can say that without the rim, the drive circuit is short-circuited. It lacks a source and is unable to return to its goal. In this sense, it hinders the inscription of the drive object in the big other. So this is one of the reasons that And this is very much an accepted sort of idea in the Lacanian world of autism. This is the saying that in autism, there is no big other. So what we see in a way, or the way that I will present it today, is that the big other is not rendered as the carrier of the drive object. For autistic subjects, the other is in a way real, without holes, utterly divorced from the domain of the symbolic. And without a rim, the object is unable to initiate the relationship between the subject and the other, or the subject and language. And then we are faced with subjects that have very unique difficulties in their entry into language. So what is there to do, when there is no big other? This is a big question. And another question that is, let's say, an outcome of this one. Are we talking about subjects that are truly outside of language? This is something that some people might think. And in my book, I insist that this is not the case. I insist that autistic subjects are not divorced from language, but they use language in original ways in order to find their own unique solutions for being in the world. What I basically argue, and I won't get too deeply into this today, is that while autistic subjects have no access to the big other in terms of the locus of signifiers, they do have access to language with the help of the sign. And the sign, if we refer to some linguistic theories in the field of semiotics and also in Lacan's psychoanalysis, the sign is a linguistic unit that is distinct from the signifier. It has distinct characteristics. I can just briefly say that it's more similar to what we can refer to as a rigid linguistic object rather than the empty and dynamic signifier. Today I decided not to talk too much linguistics, so if you're interested, we can talk about it at another time. Now, what I will talk about today is the fact that with the help of signs, autistic subjects are able to construct what we call, what Jean-Claude Maléval and Éric Laurent call the neo-rim. So this is not the original rim of the drive circuit, right? I've mentioned that in autism, the hypothesis is that the rim of the drive circuit is not inscribed or inscribed and is foreclosed. So the neo-rim, the rim of autism, is a supplementary rim that enables a unique psychic dynamism in autism. And it is through the work of repetition and memorization that autistic subjects are able to develop their neo-rim based on their linguistic functionality up to the level of total independence. And in my work, I've attempted to identify the different modalities in the utilization of the sign in the construction of the rim. And based on previous work of Jean-Claude Maléval and other case studies and testimonies that I've had access to, I've identified so far 4 such modalities that are distributed on what I call the autistic linguistic spectrum, which is more of a, like a play of words referring to the ASD, the autism spectrum disorder, and is in fact an alternative to the behavioral cognitivist framework of the ASD. Now, each of these modalities enables a particular dynamism for the subject in its engagement with the body, with knowledge, and with the social bond. And each of these modalities dictates a different mode of operation for the subject. And in this sense, we can say that they necessitate a distinct analytic position in the treatment and facilitation of autism. So they provide some trajectories in this sense. Now, in the rest of my time today, I think I have about 10 to 15 minutes. I'll briefly describe these modalities, and finally, I'll present them on my last little drawing for you today on the autistic linguistic spectrum, which is a model that hopefully in the future would be better translated into a matheme of some sorts. So let's start from the first modality, which we can call the absence of the rim. So the first modality of the rim, of the neo-rim, I'll call it the rim from now on, but I'm referring to the autistic neo-rim. So the first modality of the rim characterizes the most severe forms of autism. And this is where autistic subjects refuse to engage with language as a whole. In these cases, we see almost no linguistic expressions. We do see some spontaneous outbreaks of sounds, some holophrastic vocalizations. We see subjects that manifest a state of bodily confusion where there's no degree of separation between subject and object. In a way, I'll mention this as sort of a side note. I think this is somewhat of a hypothetical mode, because I think that all subjects sort of take a step further, but this is a modality that we hypothesize. Now, in this state, what we see is that internal and external stimuli are experienced both as repeating invasions, and the world is experienced as an all-engulfing, limitless void. It is a repetition that is totally out of the subject's control. And the subject that is inhabited by this archaic and primitive body experiences terrible anxiety. And what we see is that in order to surmount this anxiety, these subjects commit acts of extreme violence, self-aggressiveness, and self-mutilation. We can say with the aim of demarcating a rim to their bodies that could give them some degree of separation. So this is what we can call the hypothetical modality of the absence of the rim. Now, the second modality of the rim is characterized by reliance on what is called autistic objects. Now, this term is drawn from the work of Frances Tustin. She's a British psychoanalyst that worked with autistic children, and she described how they constantly stick objects to their bodies, not using them for their objective functions, but for their sensations. And she argued that they conceive of these objects as part of their bodies, and through them gain some self-sufficiency that protects them from the anxiety that they experience in the world. Now, one might say that this fascination and total absorption in the interaction with autistic objects, and we see this in the clinic of autism, this absorption provides a sufficient distraction that protects the subject from, let's say, the disorganized experience of the body, and provides it with some sense of stability and control. So we're talking about moments where autistic subjects lose themselves in their objects, becoming isolated in these temporary states of shielded interaction. These are commonly repetitive or ritualized patterns of verbal or sensomotor behavior. And these have little space available for other people. They are very intimate and private. Now, in a paper that was recently published, I call these moments of transitive equation, differentiating this from transitive identification. So these are moments of a certain equation that the subject experiences with the autistic object, becoming the autistic object in a way. Now, these moments are helpful. They're very helpful for autistic subjects, but their duration is limited because the subject remains dependent on meticulously maintaining this rigid relationship that they achieve with the object. Now, this tendency has already been described by Leo Kanner, who's, let's say, the first psychologist to refer to autism as a distinct syndrome. And he said that he identified already in 1943 an anxiously obsessive desire for the maintenance of sameness, he calls this sameness, that nobody but the child himself may disrupt on rare occasions. So what we see is, let's say, these accidental encounters with objects that have dynamic value for the subject and can be somehow maintained through their repetition. But when the repetition is broken, and usually is broken by the outside, their dynamic value is lost. So this renders the reliance on transitive equation with the object to be fragile and prone to collapse. And this is when we sometimes see fits of rage and anxiety. Going on to the third modality of the RIM, which is called the dynamic RIM. So I forgot to mention the second modality is called the protective RIM. This is how the RIM is used for protection. And the third modality is the dynamic RIM. Now, after collecting all these different objects on the protective RIM, their use can facilitate the development of the dynamic RIM. So briefly, I can state that this entails the transition from the level of the simple autistic object to the level of the complex autistic object. Now, the complex autistic object is a more developed and versatile modality of the autistic object. Basically, we can see it as a construct that combines the localized dynamic function of several autistic objects into a complex apparatus. And this enables the subject to handle more intricate goals in more complex circumstances. It provides a certain consistency, a supplementary consistency to the body image, and really contributes to the subject's libidinal animation. And we call it dynamic, and this is borrowed from Maleval. We call it dynamic because it's open to change. Its characteristics can develop over time, and its function can be adapted to different contexts and different situations. And the subject can choose to plug into it at will, like an auxiliary machine, and integrate its dynamic properties. But it's important to mention that the dynamic RIM does not entail a direct sense of corporeal possession. This is because it provides an integration that is based on one's intellectual comprehension of the parallel between the object and the body. And it doesn't entail a vital sense of intimacy or belonging. So we can say that it is based on an intellectual process of trial and error, where the subject learns how to manage certain bodily sensations and engage in certain movements with the help of the complex autistic object, later on developing these to more proficient skills that can turn into skills that are, let's say, appreciated in the social bond. Now, what we must emphasize is that the memorization and the contextualization of these situations enables the preservation of an acquired knowledge of being through a repetition that is more like a learning by heart than what we saw in the protective RIM, which is the maintenance of an immediate dynamic, keeping it going, never letting it go. So I'm nearing the end of my talk and getting to the last modality of the RIM, which is called the hollowed out RIM. Now, the reliance on the integrating function of the intellect is sometimes developed among autistic subjects to a level in which the neo-RIM is hollowed out from its objects, leaving the subject to solely rely on its intellectual and linguistic capacities. So one can say that on all the modalities of the autistic neo-RIM, inscriptions happen in the psyche. But these are not taken in the other, in the big other, but are said to be taken in the supplementary locus that Maleval calls, quite ingeniously, I think, the synthetic other. Now, on the level of the hollowed out rim, the development of specific interests that give rise to the joyful construction of databases and knowledge of and experience happens in this synthetic other. And these can be developed in solitary activities, what can be viewed as closed off system of knowledge. And I recommend seeing a clip on YouTube by Amanda Baggs called In Our Language that discusses this. Or they can be developed into fields of expertise that are socially valued, up to the point where one is fully incorporated in the social bond and has even, we can say, a total independence. Now, on this level, work with autistic subjects revolves the development of their linguistic skills through the support of their curiosity for knowledge and engagement with language. So we see here a repetition as an extension of knowledge in an infinite chain. Right? Now, there is another aspect to this that I've described in the book and also in another paper. The way that the reliance on knowledge also is accompanied by a certain creation, let's say a libidinal creation that is invested in the social bond. But I don't think I'll have time to talk about this today. I'll just mention that so far I've identified two trajectories in this way. One is an imaginary staging of a loss, and the other is a fabrication of a unique autistic narcissistic object that is invested in a domain beyond the subject's control. In any case, these two acts, let's say, are described by autistic subjects as extremely important and mark a dramatic change in their subjective dynamism and in their life in general. So I'll show you the last drawing that I made today, and I'll finish up my talk. So what you see here is a summary of the development of the modalities of the neo-RIM in the treatment of autism. Now, I want to emphasize that this should not be taken as a developmental model. Right? It is a schema that marks out several interdependent waypoints in the development of one's linguistic functionality and its use in the world. So like any form of meta-psychology, it doesn't aim to determine the confines of the subject, right? But it aims to provide some coordinates in the direction of the treatment. Right? I hope at least that they can be developed and refined by you, the listeners today that are interested in the Lacanian psychoanalytic approach to autism. And well, it will be my pleasure to discuss them in a short while. But I'll stop here as I'm really looking forward to Maria's presentation on the elements of the treatment of autism from her practice. So we can stop here, and I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maria. Wonderful. Wow, what a combination. Amazing both papers or work. Yeah. So, well, now we open. Leon, do you want to say something before we open to participants?
No, please.
Okay, because okay, that was, I'm sorry, that was a clapping. I thought it was a hand. Okay, so we open to the floor. I know that Marina, thank you so much, Marina, because she has helped us a lot in this for today's activity. So if you want to start asking some question, or then Maria, if you have a little bit, also I know that you have Andrea, you know, like we'll see, and we open the floor. So Marina, you want to start?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Leon. The presentation was amazing, both Maria's and Leon's. And I would like to start with a question to Leon Brenner. As mentioned in your book, autistic subjects have difficulty in entering the social bond. They use language of the other linguistic units, which are called signs, and they construct the synthetic other. You also mentioned that the autistic unconscious is represented topologically like the torus, in contrast to the Möbius strip, which represents the Freudian unconscious. Could you give us some details on the two topological dimensions and their difference?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Marina, for this question. I've spoken to Marina before, and she did such an amazing job reading the chapter I provided. I'm really looking forward for further questions. Yes, absolutely. This is a topic that is very interesting to me today, and also I think needs further development. But when we think about the unconscious, let's think about it in two ways, in a Freudian and Lacanian way. So, in the Freudian rendition, the unconscious is constructed through repression. So, repression is a vital element in the construction of the unconscious. And what we see in autism, and this is something that we see in the psychoanalytic literature, but also in the testimonies of autistic subjects, is that in autism we don't really see repression. What I try to sort of emphasize that, well, we definitely don't see secondary repression, or what Freud called depression as defense. This is the very neurotic kind of mechanism. But we also don't see primal repression on the level that Freud called bejahung. In English, we call this affirmation. So, according to the Freudian definition, we cannot say that the autistic unconscious, well, it just doesn't abide by this definition. So, in this sense, we have to provide a new definition for the unconscious when we talk about autism. Now, in Lacanian terms, Lacan says that the unconscious is structured like a language made up of signifiers. Now, okay, this is the definition of the unconscious, but in autism we see that there is no other. There is no access to signifiers. So in this sense, we also have a problem of speaking of the unconscious in terms of autism, even if we address it from a Lacanian perspective. So from both of these perspectives, we have to say something new about the unconscious when we speak about it in terms of autism. Now, Marina, you've mentioned the Möbius strip and the torus. It's true that Lacan uses the Möbius strip as a demonstration of the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious in neurosis. The Möbius strip is like a little strip, and you can make it at home if you just take a paper strip and make one twist. You see this image in the painting. I just Maria, yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we'll just mute when we both speak, because it might cause some problems. Okay, so you see the Möbius strip in the pictures drawn by Usher, where you see this ant walking on the strip. It's a special kind of topological figure, because on every point of the Möbius, it seems like there are two surfaces. But mathematically speaking, topologically speaking, the Möbius strip is made of only one surface. If you go over the surface, you see that you will get back to the same point you started with. So this is a nice demonstration of how the unconscious works in neurosis. Now, in autism, I provide the example of the torus, and Eric Laurent presents this example earlier in his book, La bataille de l'autisme. And the torus is an interesting topological figure because it has a surface which has no distinction between inside and an outside. So in a way, if one is situated on the surface of the torus, you can imagine it like a donut with a hole in the middle. So it's like a donut, yes. So if you are situated on the surface of the torus and you look inside, you are actually looking outside as well. You're seeing yourself looking inside on the outside. So we see here a continuity, a lack of distinction between inside and outside. When Lacan talks about the unconscious in psychosis, there is one special quote where he calls it, well, the psychotic unconscious is like an open sky. You won't find this in the English translation. It's a bit different translated by Bruce Fink, but in the French it's à ciel ouvert, which is like the name of the famous movie from Les Courtils in Belgium. So like an open sky, the unconscious like an open sky. And I think this is a clue as to how the autistic unconscious operates. And I found a very compelling testimony to this kind of functioning in Temple Grandin's book, Thinking in Pictures. And it's a terrific book if you want to see a very interesting testimony of an autistic subject. And she says that, in fact, well, she says this, she has no repression. So there is no repression in her psyche. It's interesting because she's not a psychoanalyst. But she says that she has access to all of her memories. And she can actively manipulate her memory, which is composed of a set of images. And through this manipulation, she is able to construct, I don't know, elements in her psyche which help her out and enable her to achieve the things that she's achieved in life. So if you ask me, and this, again, this is something that needs further development, if we think of the autistic unconscious as an open sky, we can think about it as something that can be manipulated in the treatment consciously. So this is something, so in this sense, the work with the unconscious, and this is the work of the psychoanalyst, in a way, if this is my, let's say, intuition or hypothesis at this point, is to be achieved in a very direct and open way. So the subject can manipulate it in this way. Grandin gave us a clue as to this manipulation should happen on a level, an imaginary level, but I think that we should be open to more ways in which this can happen by speaking with other subjects. So I hope this was a clarifying answer, Marina.
Thank you very much, Leon. Actually, I didn't say so. You said so in your book.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Leon. So now, Maria Ruiz, if you can ask your question.
Thank you. First of all, well, I again wanted to thank Maria and Leon for the talk. It's been really helpful and really good content. So basically, my question is sort of to Maria, and it's more in a practical sense. I'm just curious if you wanted to share a little bit of how do you navigate sort of your conversations with, because I know you engage with like sort of frontline staff who are the people who sort of like work with your clients on a daily basis. And like, I'm curious about how you navigate those conversations in terms of like, I know that sometimes it can be challenging to share or explain sort of what you're basing your approach in terms of like psychoanalytic or Lacanian theory. So I'm not even sure if you take too much time or energy in explaining this, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just sort of curious because it's usually in those environments, it's a lot of CBT and those kind of theories. So I'm always feel a little challenging to find a way to introduce Lacanian theory, and I'm interested in like sort of tips and tricks on how you do it. And I also wanted to, this is sort of like a second, I wanted to also subscribe to sort of your question to Leon on if there's a continuity on those three modalities of the RIM, if there's a logical sort of like step 1, 2, 3, or if there's sort of like a reversal sometimes. And yeah, that's sort of my question. Thanks.
Wow, thank you for that question. The first question, which is something that I really, really love to talk about. I navigate that world of, I mean, I'm in the community. I'm out there. For years, I have navigated that world of even colleagues who, you know, they're CBT practitioners. And the way you do this is with, you know, you do your work, and when they see effects, when they see changes, they're going to ask, and then you share your work with them. Okay. And I'll give you a good example. When I worked on my postdoc, it was a setting where it was all about evidence-based practices. And I had to do a colloquium. I did mine on non-directive therapy, psychodynamic, non-directive play work with autistic children. And they said, well, if you want to do this, but you're going to have to show that some evidence-based kind of things. And I worked very, very hard. And by the way, there's certain things that out there, I'm not going to get into it now, but there's research that shows, and that you can work with, okay, that psychodynamic practices with autistic children work, okay. But that being said, when I presented this work, it was very nicely received. And I went on in that same setting. I went on to work in an outpatient setting, seeing autistic individuals with a dual diagnosis. And they were all very, very interested in the work that I was doing. So, and I continue to do this. You know, again, I'm not just in private practice, I'm in different community settings where many practitioners come from CBT. So I don't know if that answers the question, but you just need to do your work. And as they see, again, as they see changes, as they see effects, people become interested. And they will ask, and you're just there ready to talk about the work that you do. Now, about the continuum of the RIM. And I have that question for Leon. As I saw, when I look back at my cases and I was trying to situate, you know, what is happening here in the RIM.
Leon, thank you, Maria.
I'll briefly comment, Maria, because it's a very good question. It's a very practical and important question. The idea that at least I progress is a non-developmental model. So this is generally what I present. And, you know, each modality, and I'm not saying that these are the only modalities that exist for autistic subjects. It's the job of all of us to find out. Maybe there are more, right? But these are the modalities that I identified. And these modalities, each one dictates a different mode of operation in the treatment, right? So these are modalities that are oriented to the practice. They can all appear in our practice, or only some of them can appear in our practice. I can tell you, and this might be like a heuristic, that usually protection is to be put in place before the dynamic and intellectual properties of the RIM are developed. But, you know, sometimes subjects don't need the protection at an early age. Sometimes autistic subjects didn't experience that at an early age, and they only come to our practice at an older age. when they're struggling with social problems or sexual problems. And then, well, there is no need to address the protective aspect of the rim, but the complexification of the synthetic other is what is to be put in place, right? And I can attest from at least my praxis, which is mostly with autistic subjects which are on that sort of engaging with these questions, that, you know, the work is let's say a work of identifying the models that they compose for understanding and living in the world and complexifying them. This can happen, but I don't think that there is sort of a reliance and we have to see 1, 2, 3, and then 4. But I do think that protection is sort of substantial. But again, well, I'm sure that we can find cases where it works otherwise. So yeah, I hope this answered.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you. But I truly find this model very, very helpful in placing what is happening. And like you said, it's not a developmental model. It's not linear. However, it's extreme. It did help me to go back and conceptualize these cases, and I think it's very helpful for practitioners who are also, you know, starting out. They can really start to conceptualize with this model. I think it's very helpful. Now, I agree with you. My last case, the Asperger, you know, who has Asperger and he's gifted. He's not, you know, he is in that pinnacle, moving towards that pinnacle of the dynamic rim. And it's clear there, it's clear. I'm talking more about my second case where he's low functioning, he's nonverbal, where you can see the two. I could really see that at the beginning he was there in this void, but at the same time he's in the protective, working on that. I'm speaking of those cases where you can see like transitioning. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, both Maria and Leon. Yeah, Peter, you have I think you were first and Andrea, so, and then after Andrea.
Sure, can you hear me? Hi, Leon, hi, Maria. This is a rare pleasure for me, this lecture, in that the great majority of it I agree with, and that I'm gonna state that I believe, though Leon, your book is still in the mail, that a lot of parallels to what I do, where it's a practice with artists, where I want to say it's essentially more of a clinic of doing and making in line with the symptom and not thinking or repression. And I think it's very important that Lacanian psychoanalysis is caught up to, because I think an interesting tenet for me is that I think it's not only as you eloquently describe features of an autistic subject, Leon, but that I think there are also I believe there are features of this in general in contemporaneous society. But what I want to say is, since I do agree with most of it, I did want to ask two little points, one for each of you, that I hope for elaboration or further research, because this idea of the synthetic other is I think very crucial. But so, for example, Maria, with your case of at one point you point out that your patient was no longer creating the objects that keep the other at a distance, and it's therapeutic. entered them into the social bond a little more. That's what it seems. And yet, this is an artist, a person creating. What I want to point out is that it's not so clear to me that it's a great thing to stop him from creating these objects, right?
Okay. I just need to clarify something, okay? I'm so sorry, I know it's 3 cases and they're back to back. I can get confusing, okay? But he is not an artist. That was the 2nd case. The one, he stopped creating his objects. He's not an artist. This is the nonverbal, okay? The artist is the 3rd case. So I think there's a little confusion there. This is why it sounds a little weird, okay?
I see. Okay.
Okay, yeah, no. This is the 2nd case. This is the case of the nonverbal adult who, when I started, he's very low, he's low functioning, but then again, he's done a lot of progress. And yes, at the beginning, he is creating objects of his creation, okay? Creating these objects to keep the other at a distance and to keep himself safe and to reduce his anxiety, okay? Now, with the treatment, as the treatment progresses, I can tell you I am the first one to be surprised. I think one fantastic thing about this clinic is that at least I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised at, what I find next time. And he abandoned the objects. He's no longer creating these objects. He's no longer using the blanket anymore. And all of this has pretty much happened back to back, really. And he's there sitting, watching television without the blanket, okay? And now he has incorporated me into the circular dance that he continues to do. He used to do that with a particular object that he has also abandoned. So he has abandoned many of these objects and he hasn't, and then I realized at some point, wait a minute, I'm the object now. But then reading this chapter, Leon's chapter, I'm like, no, I'm the double here. And this is, like I said, this is when it's beautiful when you see theory and the clinic coming together and you can really see it, okay? But that is the 2nd case, which I'm sorry because I've read these cases back to back. But the artist did not have the artist is not, the artist is a gifted Asperger, okay, who is an amazing artist, and who will do very, very well in life with his art. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was my mistake, though.
No.
Still,
it's 3 cases back to back. It gets confusing.
And my question, serious, what you think about this, Leon, concerns at the beginning about the distinction of the Lacanian distinction of the drive, which I have spent most of my life being in agreement with. That is to say, surely it's not a sort of almost biological determinism of this sort of instinct-based classical psychoanalyst model that Lacan was rightfully critiquing, and that I think it's very, very important, both theoretically and yeah, of course, clinically, but to recognize the division, to use your words, predicated on rupture between instinct and drive. And yet, I have to say, even though as a working hypothesis, and to detract from the more classical model, which is absurd. But what I have to say is that it also seems, absurd and not very realistic for Lacanians to strictly divide drive and instinct. And I mean, quite frankly, thinking about autistic individuals where biological impulses become quite relevant, or more so. You know, it seems very unrealistic to me to consider, you know, the drives completely free from instinctual residue. Very important on a theoretical level that jump, you know, was made to distinguish them, you know, in all the complexities, you know, as you put it, on account, you said something like on account of signifiers effect on the real, and there's various ways we could formulate this where drive and instinct divide and how they do. But nonetheless, it seems wholly unrealistic to me. That is, and I think contributes to a sort of denial of any biological predication in Lacanianism, and for that matter, kind of postmodern narratives. And I was wondering your thoughts about that, because it seems to me wholly unrealistic on a psychological level. Your basis.
Thanks, Peter, for this question. Maybe you can clarify your question.
Well, I mean, kind of like, you know, when you were talking about hunger, right? We are biological beings, and even though it's very important for the Lacanian clinic to understand that the drive is not instinct, nonetheless, it seems absurd to me to say that drives are completely alien and disconnected from what we could call, you know, the instinctual life of the body and biology. It seems very unrealistic. I think it's important that the drive is recognized to sort of, you know, circumvent and, so, for that matter, circumnavigate and be distinct from the instincts as were construed by these classical Freudians, and yet it seems very unrealistic on a, you know, I mean, for example, on an academic psychological or just medical basis.
Well, maybe I can answer this briefly. You know, the drive is, the drive, first of all, is represented in the psyche. This is what Freud says. Well, the drive is, let's say, the first instance of psychic representation. He calls this representatives of the drive, right? This is what he describes. And he says that these representatives are somewhere in between the level of an instinct and the level of a fully articulated idea, right? So they're not a signifier in Lacanian terms, and they're not hunger in, let's say, instinctual terms. There's something in the middle, right? There's something in between, and this is Freud. And in the moment that they're inscribed in the psyche, something about the operation of the psyche is also fixated. So, you know, this is quite commonsensical from Freud. He says, in order for, many things happen, you know, and you look at babies, many things happen for babies. But in order for something to persist, to be more than an immediate experience, we have to inscribe it. It has to be inscribed, right? Otherwise, it's just like a camera, you know, viewing things, and every moment something is viewed. But there is no continuation. There is nothing that we can call a psyche at that point. So the drives, the inscription of the drives, enables, let's say, what we call a psyche in psychoanalysis, right? This is why it's important for Lacan to distinguish them from the instinct, that for him, the instinct would be something that doesn't necessarily have to be, is not inscribed. It operates on the level of, let's say, what I gave the example of the camera, right? So these are things which happen and go away. They are important for the operation of the camera, let's say, but they're not really have anything to do with what we call a psyche. And this is why I think, and this is only my humble opinion, that Lacan distinguishes between these two notions. I think it's not a redundant distinction, because one has to do with what Lacan's view as a psyche, and the other has to do with, let's say, the organismic apparatus, which is definitely part of our life. Yeah. But it is only part of our life or part of our reality when it is inscribed.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter and Leon. Now, Andrea, you have please, your question.
Thank you, Leon and Maria. My question is for Maria. I was wondering if you can talk more about the case of a broken heart, and if you can talk more about Sandy's sign and how you used it in the therapy.
I'm sorry, what was the last?
How you used it in her treatment.
How did I use, I'm sorry.
Her sign.
The sign?
Yeah, what was Sandy's sign and how you used it in the treatment with her?
Okay. Now, I believe that the most important aspect of the case, like I said, is the songs, and it's the voice. Okay. And how she, so thinking of the sign here, okay, how what happened in this case, where you can see the evolution, you know, her development there in that room, is how she goes from singing an entire song, with very complex words and lengthy song, and even including the dial of the radio station. She goes from singing this entire song, which again, it surprised me that she could do that, because she just spoke words here and there, and all she had was sounds. Okay, so she went from losing all these lyrics, all these words, verbosity. This is a case where you can really see the verbosity here, the excess, not the deficit, you know, because she can say words, and she can say many, many words in this song. So she goes from losing the song, these lyrics, to singing a shorter, a song with just 2 lines. And then she doesn't do that anymore. And then she starts to do the humming of the wedding march. And then eventually, I don't even recognize the melodies anymore. Now she's doing melodies of her humming to melodies of her own creation, okay? So how does this, I mean, this is what's important here, because as she is losing all these lyrics, okay, and she begins to hum these melodies, she begins to say more words, and she starts to use those short sentences, like saying, Marie, sleep, okay? So the sign, the question of the sign here, you know, I would say that it comes via these losing of all this verbosity. And it, as you can see, it becomes narrower, okay? Shortens in a way. All this, I don't know if that answers. Perhaps Leon can add something to this, how he sees that.
No, I have nothing to add.
I don't know the answer.
Okay, somebody else have questions, comments? Marina?
I've got a question for Maria. I would like to ask her about the third case, about the artist, actually. And if we could say that this case is the hollowing out of the rim, according to Leon Brenner's book. The first one is this, and the second one for Maria is how difficult is for an analyst to incorporate the objects, or like you said, if you were like becoming the double, how difficult is it for a practitioner to do so?
You had a first question for Leon, right? Or do I answer?
I think it was
Marina?
for you, Maria.
Yes.
It's for me. It was 2 questions.
No,
Okay,
no.
this is for me. Okay.
Yeah, for you, they are clinical questions, actually.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. No, I understood that there was also for Leon now and then me. Okay.
The first question was for the third case of yours.
Okay. Now, how difficult was it in the treatment to get to that place where I become his object double? Is that the question?
The one is
Is that the question,
the one is
Marina?
and
How difficult it was, how is it difficult to get from the beginning until that moment where I can see that I have become an object double for Adrian, right?
right. And the second one was if you think that in the case of the artist is the hollowing out of the rib because he's open to the synthetic other. He's fabricating something.
The first question, okay? How can I put this? It was, you don't know what's going to happen in a treatment. You know, I was never there thinking, how am I going to become an object double for Adrian? That never even crossed my mind, okay? That's why I said, it's really, really surprised me, okay? In fact, it surprised me that he was abandoning all these objects, one after another, after another, after another, which is wonderful, again, that you can see theory in practice, okay? But I never enter a treatment with a plan of this is how things are going to happen. It's the subject, it's Adrian who leads, okay? And as he leads, and then I move forward. I would say what I do that is planned is when I observe and I observe, it's always coming from a place of how am I going to insert myself in this presentation, which I would say, how am I going to insert myself in this rim? Okay. Now that is more, this is where you, and I think it's important here to speak about the desire of the analyst, okay, which is there, it's present, because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to work. It's very challenging at the beginning of the treatment, especially to find that opening, to be able to insert yourself. It's very difficult, okay? So there's a lot of observation, there's lots, and by the way, sometimes you try and you feel that maybe it's here, you see an opening, nothing happens, okay? So I would say that first, you need to find any case, whether it's low functioning or whether, you know, if we look at it on the development of the rim, whether it's, you know, it's in the protective, moving into the dynamic, you need to find openings so that you can work, okay? Now, it was never, I never had a plan that where I said, you know, now that we've moved in this direction, right? Somehow I'm going to work on intervention so that I can become his double. It just never, because you don't know how the treatment is going to go. It's the subject who leads you. In this, of course, that there were moments that paved the way for that to have happened, okay? And now in retrospect, as I'm writing the case, I can see it clearly, okay? There were things that were occurring that led to Adrian placing me in that position of that ready-made apparatus, this whole object, because this is what I would be, right? And I don't know if we can say a replacement for all those other objects that he got rid of. Of course, this is in that rim that you can see that there's movement. There's movement towards more, how can we say, I don't want to use better. I'm just saying there's a movement towards better ways of being in the world, okay, and functioning, okay, and being in the world with himself and the other, okay. But we don't really know. We are working in a way for that to happen. Everything, all our movements, right, are in that direction. But we don't really know if at some point the subject is going to construct a double. It happened here, and I can see it clearly. And you can see everything else that was happening when he started to abandon all the objects, all these objects. And I was thinking here, this is really interesting. He's not fabricating anything anymore. He's not using his blanket anymore. And then that paved the way for him to incorporate me, okay? But it's a step at a time. It's a step at a time, okay? And I want to say something else about the objects. I think it was Tustin. It was Francis Tustin who said that it's at some moment, it is important for these objects to be abandoned, for any movement to take place. Yeah, because they are life-taking objects. If they can let go, if they can't abandon the object, they become life. I don't know if that's exactly how she stated, but they become life-taking objects, I think. And the last question about the artist. Well, you can see he's on his way, and then that rim of, of the pinnacle. He's on his way there, okay? Creating, all the social exchange, being able to use his interests and talents to create this exchange. And he's very much moving forward, I would say. He has moved forward. So in that direction.
Okay. Leon, do you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit. I think we're almost at the end, but just add to this, I think, Marina, very important question. I think, when we look at an analysis in cases of neurosis, there's no active manipulation of the transference. It is not that someone takes 1, 2, 3 steps in order to sort of enable the transference. The only thing that we might do is not fall into the trap of the conception of love, right? As Lacan talks about in Seminar 8, when he talks about Socrates, that doesn't let his student put him in his pocket as his lover. The only thing that we have are hints of our positioning in the transference, right? And this is what directs the treatment, yes. Sometimes there is no transference, and yeah, we don't even start. Yeah, this is possible. And on the level of autism, maybe it's not exactly transference, or we need to re-articulate what transference is, yes. But again, there is no active situating of the analyst in a certain position. And again, there's always a questioning. Am I functioning as the double, as Maria has very eloquently said? Yes. Am I positioned as the double? This is always a hypothesis. And again, this is something that I think is very important in Lacanian orientation, that the analyst never knows. Right? It's never a matter of knowing, of having a knowledge of the subject. But there is a work, right? And these are works that are based on hypotheses. Maybe I am. And let's see where the treatment takes us from there. So I think it's very crucial in any form of an analysis. And we see this in autism as well.
Thank you, Leon. So I don't know if you both want like final words. I will close at already 2 o'clock. So
well, it's already 8 o'clock here. As you can see, it became darker. I had a terrific time, and thank you so much for having me. I really hope to come and visit Canada soon.
Yeah. Welcome.
I visited a few years ago. It was one of my best vacations in my whole life, but I went to the west of Canada. So maybe it's time to visit Toronto as well and say hello. So in hope of doing that in the future.
You would very welcome. Maria?
I just want to say thank you, Inez. Thank you, Leon. This has been, for me, it has been a wonderful experience, fantastic conversation, and hope that there's many more like this. The, autism, it's something that we need to keep discussing. So thank you so much.
Yeah, so to be continued. Yeah, so thank you, Leon. Thank you, Leona Maria, for your wonderful work. Thank you, Marina, for your support. Thank you for all the questions and for all the participants. Thank you. So I just put in the website, I'm sorry, in our chat, our next activity is also toward the NLS Congress. Thank you, Leon, that you said that. That is in the July 2nd and 3rd of July, fixation and repetition. And our next activity will be at the end of October 30th, transfer, repetition, and iteration in the clinic of the Parletre by Gerardo Requis, that he's a member of LANEL, that is the Caribbean school, and also he's member of the Spanish, he moved to Spain, so of our Spanish school. So I hope to see you in our next activities. You have our two YouTube channels so you can see all the previous activities, and thank you so much. I really enjoy. It was amazing, the work of today. So thank you. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.